This is the Edge of Excellence, empowering people to shape the future. Let's inspire, innovate, and explore together. Welcome to Edge of Excellence, the podcast where we explore how leadership, culture, and technology can empower businesses to grow and thrive. I'm your co-host, Jess DePorch. Today's episode is AI without the hype, what leaders really need to know. With today's conversation, we're cutting through all the buzz to talk about how AI is actually being used in business, what's working, what's not, and what leaders should focus on first. Brian, why don't you tell us who's joining us today?
Today's guest is someone who brings both technical depth and strategic clarity to every conversation, especially when it comes to AI. I'm excited to welcome Ed Perkins, a principal consultant and vCIO here at iuvo. I've worked with Ed for a long time here and at previous jobs, and we're really pleased to have him here. He has over 2 decades of experience in IT, and Ed has built and led high-performing teams, designed infrastructure from the ground up, and delivered real value again and again. What makes Ed especially relevant to today's episode is his work at the forefront of secure, scalable AI. He developed iuvo AI, our proprietary hosting platform designed specifically to empower data-intensive organizations to use AI responsibly, securely, and effectively. Ed, welcome to Edge of Excellence.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be exciting to talk about where we are and maybe where we're headed in AI today.
Oh yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I don't know who's not talking about AI these days. So it's a very relevant topic. And I'm so glad to have you on here, Ed. Just a little bit of background about Ed from my personal experience. Ed has been one of the key members of the team that has really helped me better understand tech as a non-technical person. And so I think he's a perfect person to have on today's episode to kind of explain and talk about something that can be a little complicated for folks like me who are not super technical. So Ed, I'm really curious what your thoughts are on what you think the biggest misconceptions about AI in business are right now.
I think there's actually two camps. There's the one camp that AI is just bad. It's terrible. We shouldn't use it. And then I also think there's another camp though that AI will solve all of our problems, and we'll be able to let go of all of our employees. We'll make tons of money, and I think both camps are probably equally wrong. And it's in the middle there.
That's interesting. And what do you think is making businesses feel like there's such a rush or they have so much pressure to do something with AI? Like it feels like not only is everybody talking about it, but it does feel like there's like this pressure cooker starting to build where everyone across all industries are trying to find ways to implement it. And where do you think that's coming from?
I think a lot of it is me too. We see NVIDIA, which is the highest market cap company in the world, where just a few years ago, nobody would have considered them to be in such a position. They're a company that made graphics cards for video gamers, and now here they are, bigger than Apple, bigger than Microsoft, and so I think that's one thing. A lot of software companies, for example, are recently the CEO of Salesforce was touting how much AI has optimized that business. And so I think that when other people hear these wild stories of success, they feel like, oh my gosh, we don't have that success. We must be missing the boat.
Well, Ed, you mentioned a few real big companies like Salesforce and NVIDIA. What is what do you think about the smaller companies? They're not. Do you have a sense of what they're feeling?
I think some are feeling stressed about this. Others are probably ignoring it. I've talked to people that they're like, it's a fad. It's going to pass. And in defense of that position, this is not the first AI hype we've ever seen. So I get that. I think this is a little bit different this time, but time will tell. And uh, and then also a lot of staff though are experimenting with it. So even if maybe there isn't a company policy, I if you're a CEO today and you think, "Oh, we're not using AI in our business," I I bet you're wrong. There's somebody there who's using it. Probably a lot of folks. Um, and so, again, I think it's a range. One of the challenges with smaller organizations today is it can be very expensive to sort of deploy your own AI. I think we will be talking about like large language models in this discussion a lot, which is we're using other people's sort of tools and how can we optimize those tools. But certainly a small organization is not going to be creating their own large language model.
No, I
Yeah.
think that's a great distinction that you just made between the two. And, you were mentioning that there are companies that are seeing success with AI. There are use cases
Yeah.
that are proving that it is really helping businesses. And there's also a lot of hype. So, how do you think leadership teams can differentiate for their business, hype versus a true opportunity? Like, how do you sort through that, do you think?
I would recommend that leaders look at their own staff and trust them, you know, and encourage them to be open with experimentation. So one of the things is having a blanket policy of no AI, I think is probably harmful because now people are still going to use it, but they're not going to share what they're doing with it. It's going to be sort of buried. And so I would rather recommend be open about it. Um, there are risks. We started here with a secure AI that at iuvo we have. Um, just using, for example, OpenAI's ChatGPT, the free version, they're very clear that they will use anything input into that for future training. So it's something to be careful of, but not fearful of. And let people experiment with it, have them share their results, both good and bad. Um, and then take the good results. How can we go further with that? And look at the bad results. Okay, how can we turn those bad results into good results?
Ed, I'd like to zoom in a little bit because you've done so much work with um, iuvo and the type of AI adoption and there's probably a cultural element of that. So can we've kind of come into AI maybe a little bit different than some others. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So one of the things, iuvo's background, it is really in sort of supporting high tech industries with their computing. Um, in some of those, for example, in biotech, it tends to be on the research side, very compute intensive, a lot of data intensive, and it's been like that now for decades. That's where iuvo's experiences lies. And so when we were looking at AI, we sort of came at it from the same background. A large language model is compute intensive. It's large by definition, so there's a fair amount of data to it, and it fits with the kind of computing that we are good at. So when we were looking at it, how can we sort of merge these two things, which brought us to the more private AI, so to speak, where you're running a large language model in your own environment, whether it's in your cloud environment, your on-prem environment, which eliminates that thing I mentioned also with ChatGPT. Oh, we're using your data for um, future training, because even if the organization, Microsoft, will say, they have policies there. If you're using their AI tools, they don't use it for training, but they are in fact looking at it because in the fine print, it says we're checking for misuse of AI. We're checking for dangerous responses. So, okay, if they're checking, they're looking at everything to see if something is there or not. So we were doing it in a completely private environment where using publicly available large language models, which are very, very good, by the way, running it on your own compute environment, now you own it. It's not being looked at by anyone else for good or bad, And this is where I think also having management involved to provide policy guardrails around, okay, what are we doing with AI? How are we using it? Um, those policy guardrails can even be built into the system so that we can see that it's being used properly, and by properly, the way our organization wants to use it.
So Ed, you're speaking to this a little bit right now. What would you say some of the risks are when it comes to implementing AI without the right leadership alignment?
Certainly, data exfiltration by mistake, PII. Oh, maybe our industry, we're looking at, we'll stay with healthcare for now. We're looking at a specific disease that we want to research. Well, if I start, and we don't have an AI policy, we don't have any AI tools that are approved, and I'm just a researcher, and I'm going to start using Google. It's right there. Do a Google search. You get the first response as a generative AI response, and I start. Maybe we're looking at allergic rhinitis or hay fever. So I'm going to start doing research on that. Um, I'm looking at maybe the impact of mast cells in this type of disease or treatment opportunities. So now it's out there that I'm looking at that. Maybe that's fine, maybe it's not, but without sort of the policy guidelines, we don't know.
Yeah, I think getting aligned on anything that you're bringing into the business is really important, but this in particular, because so many businesses may be working with really sensitive information. I think AI can do really cool things within healthcare and science, but I think it's also very sensitive, and it's important to make sure that you do have policies in place so that that information is secure, especially if it's proprietary or has to do with personal information for any of the people involved. Would you say that you've noticed personally, or can you think of some red flags that may signify that a business is looking at AI for the wrong reasons or trying to implement it for the wrong reasons?
Particularly in our customer base, I haven't seen too much of that. Um, I think what I've seen more of is people just wanting to pretend it doesn't exist. That's my firsthand experience is more commonly with that than with people, um, going at it with blinders on, so to speak. I haven't seen too much of that, frankly.
So Ed, I'm the culture guy, right? And so, but do you think? I mean, what popped in my mind a little bit is, do you think it's the culture that comes from leadership that says, like, this is, we're not going to reinvent ourselves, or we're not going to, uh, this is, we've done it well this way all the time. What do you think it's a cultural? You think it's a individual? It's something you see? Do you see it across a whole company, or just a couple individuals?
I actually do think it's a culture because in my experience, usually if it's an organization that doesn't want to use AI, certainly at least within the management team, they're all pretty much on board with not wanting to use AI. In those organizations, though, you get people who are more junior and they still want to use it. Um, it and even they might be very experienced in their position, but not in management, and they will likely want to use AI for one reason or another. Um, and so in one respect, though, that may still be good. At least the management team is in alignment. It would maybe be worse if some managers are saying, yeah, use it, other managers are saying not use it. And then depending upon who you report to, you get a different, set of guidelines. Um, and it, and why do they not want to use it? Um, I'm not sure. It could be, if you look in the media, there are certainly many stories of it going wrong. Some very dramatic stories of it going wrong, and frankly entertaining. And then a lot of stories of it going right, but sometimes the right stories aren't as um, specific. People aren't really sharing the exact details of what went right. But when things go wildly wrong, they'll put the whole chat transcript, into a story, and then it could even be confirmation bias. Oh, I'm already, for whatever reason, a little bit opposed to AI. I can point to specific examples of where it's bad, and then the examples of where it's good are more general.
Well, you referred to maybe perhaps a younger generation, like, starting to experiment with AI and do something, but what can you talk about the risks maybe of implementing AI without the right leadership alignment? Like if they, that type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it really is around data exfiltration by mistake, but particularly folks who are working with um, proprietary information, however that's defined by the organization. Maybe it's IP, maybe it's personally identifiable information. Um, and accidentally exfiltrating that. The other thing that AI can sometimes do still is what's termed hallucination, which is a bit of a euphemism for just lying or making things up. And boy, does AI lie well. It will cite references, which also are made up, of why it's right on this made up thing. Um, and if somebody's not looking at that with a little bit of a critical eye, that could be a challenge.
Yeah, I heard some interesting cases recently where lawyers were doing that, and it was citing cases and so forth, and they got in pretty big trouble when the judge kind of found out that the stuff they were citing was made up and so forth. So that is really interesting.
Ed, it's interesting to me that, you're talking about businesses that have this fear or anxiety around trying to implement AI in the business. And so they're the way that they're handling that is just by not implementing it. But you also said, and I agree with you, that if you think AI is not being used in your business, it likely is. And so I think we're at this interesting point right now for businesses where even if you do not feel comfortable with AI and you don't want to implement it, it seems like leaders really need to be having the conversation regardless and having policies made in place, because the likelihood that someone within the business is using AI in some capacity is very high. So, what would you say the early conversations are that leadership should be having internally before they invest in any sort of tech decisions?
I think every organization today should have at least an AI use policy. This is what we want and how we want it to be used. The policy shouldn't be don't use AI. It should be use AI in a safe manner. Um, Ideally, with some supervision, so there's more than one person looking at the results, and um, that that's probably enough to start with. Depending upon the industry, what they look at is proprietary information. Maybe include how to properly use that or exclude it. Today, there are still areas where I think people could use AI to their benefit without um, any proprietary information being involved. For example, every company, back to an AI policy, use AI to write an AI policy. And other policies, AI is fantastic at writing policies, job descriptions, these more mundane, generative tasks that nobody really wants to sit down and write this stuff. Um, Use AI to do it.
Well, Ed, you were giving examples earlier of people Googling, and beginning Google now is an AI response or a lookup. So if you're, I guess there's also perhaps some risk if you have let's say you have an internal AI, or you're using Microsoft 365, the AI in there, or even if you have your own LLM, it has to use data. So is there something that, you know, as far as policies or thinking, just people got to think about what data can get in AI? Because what I've seen a little bit is, as maybe you've seen this even more than I have, is that people don't classify or protect their data the way they think they are. And so you say, hey, look at this file share, let's learn something from it, and then you realize that there's stuff in there that you don't want the AI to learn from. Can you talk a little more about that?
And particularly with Microsoft's Copilot for 365, this was a well publicized issue earlier this year, where you set up SharePoint, and a lot of times, unlike prior file shares, so from the 80s through the middle teens 2000s, IT would usually set up file shares for people. When IT was doing it, security was front of mind. Oh, who should have access? Who should not have access? Let's create groups. Groups will have access to a particular file share. Um, which is both good and bad. It siloed the data, that was the negative side of it, but it also protected the data. Um, when Microsoft came out with SharePoint, it was more of an end user, do-it-yourself type of a product. And particularly once SharePoint went into SharePoint Online in the cloud as part of Microsoft 365, people are creating SharePoints all over the place, um, and often without any security around them. And that's fine, you know. But maybe there's private data being put into an HR SharePoint, for example. The HR director creates an HR SharePoint, and they start putting people's employment documents in there. And as a non-HR person, I probably never went into the HR SharePoint. I never looked at it, and whatever, it's out there and it was safe. But now we added Microsoft Copilot, and I give a query. Oh, I'm going to be say, and I'll make something up. I'm going to be hiring a software engineer. Um, how much? What's the salary range for that? And now the Copilot is going to actually has access to this HR SharePoint, is going to go through all the data, and it's going to say, well, so and so is making this, and this person's making that, and this person's making that, and gee, now I have access to all the employee, um, payroll, and maybe, I could be like a low level manager or supervisor, but I get this result back, and now I'm curious. Okay, I want to hire a CEO. What should we pay the CEO? And now I've got all of that information, and that is a real risk, and certainly was in the media earlier this year.
But there's ways to that's what we're talking about, basically having a plan and involving leadership in that early on, right?
Absolutely, this is easy to fix. This isn't a hard problem to solve. Um, and as a plug for a company like iuvo, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, gee, um, could that be us? We can certainly do audits of your Microsoft 365 or Google environment, and tell you that quickly. Um, I'm going to plug another product we have here. It is iuvo Guardian, where we can also look at your environment, and then if there are changes where, oh, somebody did create a SharePoint, or they accidentally opened a SharePoint up to people that it shouldn't be, it will report that and sort of highlight it. Um, and so back to these sort of basic IT security practices completely solves this problem that AI is bringing to light.
This makes me think of secure AI that you developed through iuvo. And one of the things that I learned through you when talking about iuvo secure AI was the fact that it doesn't have to be that you're using something like ChatGPT. You can have something like iuvo secure AI, for example, where you can actually create guardrails for your employees. And I think that beyond policy, beyond everything that you were just talking about, that's something I certainly didn't know. There may be people listening that don't know that things like that exist. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that there are products like that or solutions like that?
Sure. Yeah, and there are many. By having it, and this is a self-hosted service. By self-hosting it, you can control it as an organization. So when we're dealing with these large language models, basically what happens is you give it a set of text, and based on that text, it will predict what the next text should be. And so part of the text that you give it can be what they call a system prompt. And when you control it yourself, you can provide your own system prompts, and that's sort of the guardrails. The other thing is with our AI host, you can give it specific sets of data to work with. So, say back to my allergic rhinitis example earlier, we could provide a bunch of PDFs around research just on that disease and put it in our secure AI host and say, okay, any of the responses you give, we want you to use this set of documents and base your responses from this set of documents, which solves the hallucination problem. It solves any sort of worrying about proprietary data because it's all locally hosted. And it it can guide our researchers in that we're providing a specific set of data that we should have the AI work with. Um, and it could even be, you know, our own lab generated data as well. You know what? Let's what we're finding in our wet lab. Let's put that into it, and now work with our own data.
Yeah, when you said that about the rhinitis, it made me think about if you have a really rich data set and you have a lot of academic papers and things that have been proven, and you really have a good research team that's going to fill up this data area, you could really, I think you could really zero that in much faster. I would believe, on results, or at least know what's not going to work.
In particularly in the biopharma industry, knowing what's not going to work is huge. 90% of the drugs fail. It usually takes 5 to 10 years for a drug to fail. If you can figure out that your drugs are going to fail in a year, that's a game changing advantage actually, um, because now we can focus more resources in the drugs that are going to succeed.
And how do you think leaders should approach building long term AI strategies that also align with their business values?
I think right now flexibility. AI is changing faster than anything in my career that I've seen. Um, Jess, you and I were working on some marketing material around AI. And at one point, I remember telling you, we just need to publish this right now because in a couple of weeks, it's going to become obsolete already. Um, I've never seen things move quite that fast. So having AI policies that have some flexibility to them, um, and even your thinking, having flexibility in how you think of AI, and maybe AI does one thing today, but other things it's not capable of. Gosh, in a month, it may be capable of doing those other things, and the things it's doing well today, maybe it will be doing much better at in a very short time.
Made me think a little bit as a business owner and all the things that um, you know people like me have on their plate all the time. I guess how does do you have any recommendations for how a leader or a company that's like I'm kind of interested in it? How would I, what do I need to do, or like how do I get help understanding this? Because I'm trying to do my day job, and I just don't have the time to learn AI.
Right. Well, you certainly partners like iuvo can help. The other thing, and I know this is going to sound a little bit weird, AI can help you with AI. So as a leader, the biggest thing that most leaders have to do is make decisions, and make decisions in a timely manner. This not making a decision is frankly a decision as well. So AI, if you give it, all right, this is the data that I'm working with to make my decisions. The nice thing with it, unlike prior computer um, programs, expert systems, for example, is it can give you a range of options, and then the benefits and drawbacks of each option. So now, rather than you as a leader having to go through the original material, the raw data, dump that in an AI and ask the AI for summary results, ask it for recommendations, um, and sort of speed your decision making process, which then gives you more time. And any leader, I mean, the the most precious resource is time.
What would you say is your biggest piece of advice for anybody that may be listening in on this episode today, whether they have not adopted AI yet and have been resistant, or whether they're all in but not sure where to start? What would your message to those camps be?
First thing, start with an AI policy. Having a framework that the organization can work within, it is just it makes everybody's life easier. It will make things go faster. Um, and then try to engage with your staff and find out what they are doing, or even what they would like to do. Maybe back to what Brian just asked. Oh, I'm a researcher, I want to use AI, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know. I know other people are doing it. I've googled it, and I see that people are having successes, but like I mentioned earlier, with the successes, there's not enough detail for me to do it. Um, so, if you have employees that are in that conundrum, as a leader now, you can maybe give them specific resources. Reach out to a company like iuvo and say, hey, can you even just talk to our folks? And because we know we have folks that want to use it, but they have this concern or they're just not sure where to start. Um, that can just jumpstart up in a way. Because we have clients that are doing this stuff, we can say, hey, well, in a similar industry or in the same industry, we had a client that was doing this. This may be a good way for you to start as well.
Brian, I'd love to ask you a question. As the CEO, as the president of iuvo, we are very much in AI. We have adopted AI. Do you have any advice to leaders about how, from a cultural standpoint, to get that buy-in and to keep your culture and your overall well-being of the employees at your business healthy while also adopting AI? Like how do you do that?
Well, in a cultural sense, I think people that because AI moves so fast, like a lot of technology, you have to create a culture where there's psychological safety. Hey, is it okay? It's okay to try this, and understand it and find out how it works for you, or find your own use case and be open to that. I think that's part of it, is letting them say it's okay to experiment, and use caution, as some of the things Ed was talking about. Like if you're like have a policy that's just so you're not mistakenly looking at the wrong data, but have that ability to do that. I also think that there's one thing Ed said earlier a little bit, is that maybe people were concerned that AI is going to replace them or so forth. That's probably the thing that I hear most, maybe maybe in different areas. We haven't heard it here, but well, I haven't heard it, but I do think that what I've seen in iuvo, at least, is that we're using it to tackle more of the mundane things, so people can do creative work. And we all know that some part of everybody has a part of their job that just has to be done, and it's kind of mundane, but it's really important to get the data right or whatever. And so, I know that I personally have started to use this to shorten my analysis of things, or let people know that you know you, it's not going to replace you if you continue to learn AI and become AI, not become AI, but become versed with AI.
Who knows, someday, Brian.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. Yeah, then you can maybe you could focus on things that are a little more interesting, because you can use AI to maybe an agent or something more advanced, to, even if it's a great idea, like I got an idea, I'm not quite sure how to do this, but I think it's going to save us some time, and I can work on building customer loyalty instead of this checklist and so forth. So I think all of those, that I think that as an organization, as leadership, you need to talk to your staff about that. You need to talk to everybody and just encourage them that this is not uh, this shouldn't be a threat to you. And I think that maybe they may address some of the things that Ed's seeing at companies are like, I'm not going to do AI because of whatever reason. So I do think a culture aspect is a big part of that.
Yeah, no, well said. Ed, we are coming up on the closing of this episode. Sadly, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I would love to have you share just an interesting fact, a fun fact about yourself with anyone listening in today.
Well, wait, yeah, I do want we would do that, but I also want to just interject a little bit, because uh, Ed, we hire very interesting people here at iuvo, and interesting. Uh, and I'll say Ed surprises us more than probably most. And I just want to, before Ed, I'm learning. I'm curious to learn. Hopefully, I learned something new I don't know yet. But I just Ed is one of our first uh, guests on our podcast, and it's not by accident, because Ed leads our Tech Talk series, where we have every 2 weeks we run a Tech Talk, and Ed runs those, and we share new information. And there's been quite a few different Tech Talks and lunchtime Tech Talks on AI and so forth. So we have Ed has had leadership in that area for quite a long time, and I think I know a lot of cool things about Ed. But I'm really looking forward. Hope he can really surprise us. And no pressure, but I'm curious what you're going to say here.
Yeah, well, no pressure. You've caught me off guard. Our relationship now goes back 25 years. And I'm trying to think of something here that you may not know about.
Well,
Uh,
you can don't use me. Maybe use Jess as a
sure.
barometer, or someone,
Yeah.
or just the
Well,
audience, just in
he-
general.
here's one. I grew up a dog person. I'm very much a dog person, and my wife is a cat person, and she has sort of started to change me. I still love dogs, but I'm becoming a cat person. So there we go. Yeah.
I know. Do you have cats, or you just babysit cats?
We, well, this is our other maybe fun story. My wife tends to steal cats. Now, we don't actually steal them, but she will befriend neighbors' cats. And this has happened at multiple places where we've lived. And then the cats start coming over. So we have regular cat visitors, but we don't have our own cat. But we have a litter box, we have cat food, we have cat treats, and we have regular cat visitors.
Oh, that's awesome! Wow.
That's amazing. And no vet bills.
And yes, and no vet bills.
Even
But
better.
we have actually though taken the cats to the vet for friends as well.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool, Ed. And I'm not surprised, given the person that you are, that you would be helping your neighbor's cats in that way either. But Ed, thank you so much for joining us today on the Edge of Excellence podcast. You are one of our first guests, and it's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and today is no different. I hope that anyone listening in will be listening into our next episode coming up. You can learn more about iuvo at iuvotech.com. And we look forward to having you join us for our next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Edge of Excellence. We hope today's insights empower you to shape your future and rise to your full potential. Let's continue to grow, innovate, and lead, pushing the boundaries of excellence.